Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Multipolar Peace Network webinar. Today with the brilliant Michael von der Schulenburg, a former UN official and current member of the European Parliament for the party of Sarah Wagenknecht, which means he's, of course, a German MEP. With us is also Professor Jeffrey Sachs, whose idea it was to invite Michael to talk to us about Europe, the European Union, and the many flaws of the political setup of the continent. Michael, you have as much time as you want in order to give us your introductory remarks. Tell us what's important, also what's going on at the moment. Feel free to also touch on the 80th anniversary of the UN if you like. And after that, Jeff will give us his remarks. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, let me first start. If you ask me where Europe is, I can just tell you I don't know. I come back from Strasbourg, where we have the plenary of the European Parliament, and we had it for a few days. And I must say, it's a shocking environment. The entire Parliament, even on the right and the left, there is a Russia hatred, there is a war hysteria, there is a panic. They talk about winning the war, that Russia will go down in economics, and things like this one. It's a completely unrealistic environment, and there's hardly anybody who says something else, and it drowns immediately in this atmosphere of we have to stand together because otherwise we are going to lose. So it's a very, very difficult situation. I think what happens in the Parliament is maybe symptomatic what happens in the EU and wider the NATO members of Europe. It's not always all Europe. So I think that's my impression. And then I would like to say a few words, Jeff, after you say, what I think, what motivates these people. And because it seems to be at first, it's completely irrational. And why it is like this, why I think it is like this one, and what it means for the Ukraine and so on. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, this is, I think, the big puzzle for all of us that have seen so many exit ramps for peace that have been refused by the United States. And then when the United States seems to hint that it wants an exit ramp, then refused by Europe. It's rather shocking. You and I know, because we've been watching this close up for decades, in fact, that the war in Ukraine was completely avoidable. It could have been avoided if the United States had not pressured Europe to agree to NATO enlargement to Ukraine, especially the agreement in 2008 at the Bucharest summit, which was under U.S. pressure, where German Chancellor Angela Merkel gave in the end on the second day, said, okay, we'll promise that NATO will enlarge. But she knew how provocative this is. And then if Europe had followed through on the agreement reached in the context of the Maidan protests, which were stoked by the U.S. in February 21, 2014, when actually 3 European foreign ministers agreed with President Yanukovych that there will be elections in 8 months, but no coup. And then Europe completely folded its hands. Then in 2015, when there was the Minsk agreement to end what had become an incipient war that was based on the idea of regional autonomy for the ethnic Russian-speaking region of eastern Ukraine, modeled, by the way, on South Tyrol in Italy. So nothing extraordinary, but autonomy of 2 oblasts. And then again, Europe and the United States said, yeah, you don't have to follow through on that. And then the United States, during the first Trump term, building a 1 million-person army in Ukraine, the biggest in Europe, and an army that was shelling Donetsk city, shelling the Donbass. And the Russians saying, look, just stop NATO enlargement, enforce the Minsk agreement. But again, the US and Europe not listening to this. And then the Biden administration urging Ukraine not to sign any kind of peace agreement. You've written brilliantly about this. But Zelensky, first as an elected president, now as a martial law dictator, in effect, in my view, under the U.S. auspices pushing for more war. Then Trump comes in, and it looks like he wants an exit ramp to say, okay, stop the war. Ukraine will be neutral. And then Europe jumps up and down saying, no way, no way. That's giving in. That's appeasement. It's weird. So we are in full-fledged war right now. Europe has rejected any exit ramp starting back in 2008. Don't have NATO enlargement. In 2014, don't have a coup. In 2015, enforce the Minsk II agreement. In 2022, agree on Ukraine's neutrality. Europe, at every stage, has been a warmonger. And you see, for the politicians, and this is my question to you, Michael, this doesn't work politically for them. You look at Starmer in the UK, his approval rating is 20%, disapproval 80%. You look at Macron, it can't even go lower. It's a statistical error. 13% approve him, 87% disapprove him. 13% agree on anything in our universe. Then you look at Merz. His approval rating is plummeting also. It's in the 30s. Yeah. It's higher than the
No, it's now below the 30s. And, it's very rare in Germany that happens. Yeah.
So the question is, what is the motivation of this? It's not popular politics. It's not driven by the public saying we want war. Is it the military-industrial complex? Somebody wrote to me a brilliant sociological analysis saying the essentially they call it the armed class. This sociologist in Italy saying it's a kind of class struggle. It's the so-called professional army or the money-making military. Is that it, or is it that these leaders don't know what to do? They forgot all about diplomacy. They're really afraid. So what motivates this? You see this every day, Michael, and you're the best analyst of this. What is going on in Europe?
Jeff, it's something which bothers me a lot of times. Of course, I watched it all the time since we had the conflicts in 2014 starting and things like this one. And if you look at the European Union, it remained relatively calm on the whole thing. It followed the British and the Americans, but it didn't really have much of an own position. It is very sudden that the European Union, and then in combination with Great Britain, of course, sort of completely changed its stance and tries to take a leadership that something doesn't happen. Russia cannot win this war in Ukraine. They see this as an existential threat to them. I don't see it like this. They do. And it has something to do with their plan. I think how people, and I follow this in the discussion here, and I see, of course, a lot of these people. The interesting thing is, I think the rationale by these political elites is that it is in the multipolar world, the European Union should become one of the big powers. That's also the militarization now and all the rest of it. It should become and it cannot be Russia. And what they see now in this war, that Russia might be in future the third, still the small one, big power, and Europe is losing it. It's very interesting what happens in this year. I mean, we constantly invite in the parliament leaders from outside. There was just briefly the president of Moldova, and she came and spoke here, Mrs. What's her name, Sandu. And she was received by all with standing ovations. When she said, no, we belong to Europe and our people are for Europe, although they just cheated enormously in the elections. All ignore these cheats. Actually, our party is the only one who went there on monitoring and to say, this is the cheated elections. All the rest say that was a perfect election. It's a sign of democracy, a sign of people wanting to live with the West and things like this one. Then we have of course the prime minister of Greenland coming. Same thing again when he said, we belong to Europe and not to the United States. Standing ovation. That we have to round up Europe. We had the opposition leader of Belarus recently. I mean, 3 days ago. And he said the same thing, that they actually have the majority in Belarus, and over there soon we have the elections. We will come to you and push Russia into Asia, and you know, they all stand up and clap. I mean, as you know, Jeff, what the project really is, and I have a lot, is that we want to enlarge the European Union as quickly as we can, because we see we are in competition with Russia, who controls it on one side, and a competition on Greenland with the United States. It is an elitist project of saying we have to become larger, we have to come. You know, there was recently also von der Leyen spoke to Serbia and say, you have to make up your mind, you have to come on our political line with Russia. You can't support Russia, you must be to our, what we call our common policy. So I think this, we see there is a huge thing. There's a lot of discussion that these countries should be taken into the European Union. We should not follow the Copenhagen criteria for this, because under these criteria, none of these countries could possibly come to the European Union. We should bring them in, and then we will see and we work it out. There's yesterday, or was it before yesterday, we voted on a proposal, and the majority said yes, a proposal to have majority voting only in the European Union. That means the unanimity principle is going to be dropped. We want these troublemakers, we like Hungary and maybe soon also the Czechs and the Slovaks, we want to have them out. We want to decide, and the new members would also not get full voting rights. I mean, this whole thing is made to make now, as quickly as possible, a mammoth EU that includes, of course, Ukraine, Moldova. In all this, we still mention Georgia. We hope we get Georgia also in. We speak about the West Balkan, Serbia essentially, and of course, Greenland. And this is now, yeah, that's now since the beginning of this year. This is a big issue. We now interfere into elections in order to prevent that some opposition is, like in Romania. We intervened in the election heavily in Moldova, in Georgia, and things like this one. So we do all these type of what the Americans used to do, these regime change, internal interference, internal affairs, in order to have a situation where Europe could be enlarged, could be very quickly, could become the third great power in a multipolar world. There's the United States, there's China, and then there's Europe, or the European Union. And Russia must, of course, in this case, be small. The interesting thing historically is that the fight for dominance is about who controls Ukraine. And what is, especially from a German perspective, so interesting, because it was the same question in the First World War and in the Second World War. In both cases, we lost it, luckily, I must say. And I fear, or not fear, I predict that in the third time, we lose this fight over Ukraine again. And that is something the Europeans have not prepared at all. What happens if the Ukraine war is militarily lost? There's no plans, there's no idea, and how we speak and how we get excited about the whole thing. There is even no room to think about it. I mean, if I indicate certain things, I mean, I'm screamed down. I mean, I'd get anyway only 1 minute, but it's yeah, I think Europe has dug its hole. It is for me somehow as if we are committing suicide, collective suicide, economic suicide, and political suicide. We are enormously isolated. All these plans of expansion will not happen. I can predict this will not happen. Even Ukraine will not come into the EU. And if it comes into the EU, it will blow up the EU. We could not absorb such a large and difficult and destroyed country. And so I think it's we have here a discussion among the elites that is completely illusionary to a degree that when you sit up there, and maybe I'm not the cleverest of them all, but if you sit up there, you think It can't be true. It can just not be true how they talk about these things. But this is what we see, and I think that's the real reason. Europe wants to be a big power, wants to have more territory. That's also about territory, like the US wants also more territory now, and we are losing it. We are losing it very big time. What we have now is a situation that we are losing the war in Ukraine, and we are losing also, Israel is losing its wars. There are many wars. They're losing it. They will not recuperate all the wars they have started. It's our neighboring country. Israel is considered by the Europeans as a democratic country, as their closest ally. And the United States is over the Atlantic, but Europe will be stuck with this. And then we have also not a very friendly government in the United States. That's how I assess the situation.
It's very interesting. Pascal, if I may just make a few observations, and for me, kind of personal also, because this goes back for me very vividly 35 years, and I'll make a few points. 35 years ago, 36 years ago, the Berlin Wall fell, and Europe had the chance to be reunited. I happened to be there very much as a front row witness and also as a participant, because I was advising the new Polish democratic leadership, including a young man named Donald Tusk, I might add, who at the time was an advisor to Lech Wałęsa, and I was an advisor to Donald Tusk, and I was helping Poland. And when I was given my assignment to write an economic plan for Poland, I was told that the first sentence should be, "This is a plan for Poland's return to Europe." Okay, the idea was European reintegration. I was all for it. But we should recall, at that time, President Mikhail Gorbachev, a wonderful statesman, a brilliant, wonderful person, a man of peace, the greatest statesman of our time, reviled by many in his homeland because they associate him with inflation or the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Gorbachev fundamentally was a man of peace. And he wanted a common European home. And he said the common European home should stretch from Rotterdam to Vladivostok. In other words, it wasn't to create a new wall 1,000 kilometers to the east that would exclude Russia. It was to make a united home that would include Russia. It would include the Soviet Union, in Gorbachev's view. And then after the end of the Soviet Union at the end of 1991, I advised President Boris Yeltsin, and he wanted that common home, and it would include Russia stretching across Europe and Asia. So in that context, I was a great advocate for rapid European integration. I mean, great, very fervent. I wanted Poland to come into the European community then and the European Union very fast. 5 years, I said. It took more than that. It took 15 years for the entry, but I believed expand Europe. And I like a big Europe, but not an exclusionary Europe, not a Europe based on militarization, but a Europe based on peace. And I do view Europe as a great civilization and a great civilizational project. But the idea of the European Union going back to 1947, 1949, with the establishment of the initial building blocks of Europe, and then the 1957 Rome Treaty, was that it would be a region of peace. And for me, European enlargement was not to create a new Berlin Wall on the border of Russia. It was to make an open, inclusive space. By the way, the kind of security embodied in the Helsinki Final Act, which calls for indivisible security, that you don't build security at the expense of your neighbors. You don't expand NATO and thereby threaten Russia. You don't say we take Ukraine because Russia's our enemy. That approach is what we have right now. So I would distinguish in my own view, and I think what Michael has said is extremely illuminating. I would like a strong Europe. I would like a united Europe. I'd like an expanded Europe, but not a Europe that expands by being the enemy of Russia. This is insane. It's doomed to create more war and to create disaster. And the idea of the European project becoming the project of rearming, of $800 billion to rearm, even if one of the motivations is not to be under the thumb of the United States, something I also agree with, Europe's great motivation should be civilizational. It should be peace. It should be indivisible security. It should be close relations with Russia. That was the idea. I was there going back to 1990, to German reunification, to the promise to the Soviet Union. NATO won't move 1 inch eastward. And I think we discuss this all the time. Everyone should have no doubt that was a real commitment, absolutely explicit, repeated many times by Helmut Kohl to President Gorbachev, by James Baker III, our Secretary of State to President Gorbachev, by Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the Foreign Minister of Germany, to President Gorbachev, and repeated to Yeltsin, and absolutely clear that German reunification was not to create a new threat to Russia. But what we know, and this is so ironic, it was the United States that had the endless hostile view in the 1990s. It was the United States, together with the Eastern European countries, I'm sorry to say, with Poland, Czech Republic, that said, oh, NATO must enlarge, and that put us on a path of renewed war. So there are glimmers of what Europe wants that I agree with. I want Europe to be united, a major power. I would even agree, Michael, with dropping unanimity, not for purposes of war, but for purposes of an effective Europe. But the way that Europe is being led right now by von der Leyen, by Merz, that it's, like you say, almost a third round of this contest. You sense with Merz, oh, we lost the first 2 times, we're going to win the third time. I don't want to put words on his mouth, but you almost sense this. Russia will never win this time. This is what's so horrifying, because this is so completely unnecessary for Europe to be united, to be effective. By the way, when it comes to great powers, I personally count 4 already: the US, China, Russia, and India. And I would like Europe to be there. But I also believe, as Pascal and I talk a lot, and as Michael, you and I talk a lot, this should be major powers that are cooperating for peace, that are trading with each other, investing with each other, solving global problems, supporting the United Nations framework, not the kind of Europe that is on offer right now. And maybe these politicians, maybe they are so simple-minded that they think the only way to build a strong Europe is to have a strong enemy. You create the enemy, then unite us. You create the enemy, then you get $800 billion into the coffers for the military. You invent an implacable foe, but what they don't seem to appreciate is it's a completely deadly losing proposition. It's the self-fulfilling prophecy of a war that would be shockingly devastating for Europe itself. I was told, Michael, I don't know if it's true, but somebody in France told me how the generals are meeting right now with Macron, talking about the literal preparations for war. I can't verify that, but that was kind of an alarmed message that I got, that this is really being discussed seriously.
But Jeff, they will first have war in France itself with how the things go. I mean, what going for somewhere else? You know, Jeff, what where we see things maybe slightly different is that you're very critical about the United States, and I can follow this totally up. And I'm very critical about Europe. I think that's not the Europe I wanted to have, and I'm also potentially European. You see, we should not forget, Europe was always a project of an elite, except in the first years when people sort of felt for Europe, and it was still an economic cooperation thing, community. There is no support for Europe anymore. It is a bureaucracy which has very little democracy, which runs Europe through a lot of bureaucracy. It is, von der Leyen is not elected. She behaves like a head of state, and she takes on competences which she doesn't have in the contracts. Europe lost the possibility to have a constitution. I think it was in '93 when France and I think the Netherlands said no, and Ireland also. And then we had all these contracts, and I tried coming to the EU. I tried to read them, but Jeff, I just can't read them. And I'm used to read contracts, I mean, from my job. Try to read the Lisbon Treaty or all these things. Unreadable. It is a project of a bureaucratic elite which has taken over the idea of a unified Europe, and they will lose. Now only 50% of the people go voting. Before it was around 40%. The increase to 50% is only because we have now about 20% of those people that vote are against the European Union. That means we have probably only 30% of the population who vote for parties which are potentially pro-European Union as we have that now. So we have an enormous identity crisis. What is happening now is that the European Union project is seen as a struggle for creating it into a superpower against enemy states. Russia is an enemy state. China is an enemy state. It's very ideological, the whole argument, very moralistic, the argument. We say these are authoritarian regimes who want us to harm, and the things like this one. So it is not a Europe that to create it in a cooperative spirit with others. No, and I'm a great fan of the Charter of Paris for a New Europe, which you mentioned the Helsinki things, but the more recent one, 1990, that we should all work together, not having any front lines anymore and things like this. And we gave it up in '92 with the Wolfowitz doctrine. And this is Europe is now that we have Trump, Europe is sort of become hysterical about the whole thing. It is really, you can only say it's hysteric. When you hear Macron and Starmer and these people, it's hysteric. I mean, there is no reason anymore, and we lose completely our European identity over these things. And we cheat in elections. We make sanctions against journalists. We use the European Union, which doesn't have really a legal system, to go forward against people who we don't like, to limit our freedom of opinion, to expression and things like this one. This is all not done even through the parliament anymore. It's done by the council, and we only read about this, and we don't know who really made the decision, whether it's a law or not. There is something completely gone wrong, and it all is justified by having Russia wanting to occupy Europe. I mean, this absolutely illusionary argument that Russia will fight NATO Europe after they have occupied all of Ukraine is so ludicrous, but it holds in the population. I was recently at the hairdresser. I go very rarely to a hairdresser, but I was there, and he heard me talking, and he's a French speaking, no, and he said, "No, we're fighting for democracy." Even a man who's normal man sort of repeats these type of things. So the media and all these justifications very, very powerful in Europe, and we don't have now a large number of people who see really the danger we have in continuing a war, which is essentially, which is probably the largest they are probably the most nuclear weapons, and maybe we should
Michael,
behave differently.
and
You know, the thing is, Jeff, we are
Michael and
losing it.
Pascal,
We will not be a united Europe in the end. We are losing it. What we wanted, we are losing it. It will not come. I don't know how we survive a defeat of Ukraine politically inside, because we invested so much of our credibility. And as you said, we have a lot of politicians who don't have any real backing anymore. It is a very sad affair, in fact. No?
I think, Jeff, you're at the airport, right?
Michael, yeah. As you can see, I'm at the airport, and the gate is closing. So, Michael, I'm going, and Pascal, I'm sorry to leave this wonderful discussion. Pascal, you have a very wise interlocutor, and I'm going to listen to the rest of the discussion.
Yes.
But it's so important and powerful what Michael is saying. Europe has so much to offer, but if it destroys itself through hatred and militarization, it's the utter disaster. But I'm the last one to board the plane, so I'm going to run right now.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
catch
Have a
up
safe
with you.
flight, huh?
Thank
Bye,
you.
Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Tomorrow we're gonna read that the airplane was delayed because Professor had to finish a webinar. Michael, but let's go back. I really want to ask you about this, though. Don't you think that it has something to do, what you just described, with this? On the one hand, that the European Union is an elite project. On the other hand, that we are seeing elite capture through these transatlantic networks that were built up over 80 years. That basically all people who are at the helm of this thing are either also looking at positions in NATO or are looking at positions at the UN, like Frau Baerbock, who's now in New York, although the UN is not, in my view, not a transatlantic organization, but that we have all of these incentive structures that make sure.
No, but the European Union, I mean, the European Union has thousands, tens of thousands of highly paid jobs. I mean, as a deputy, we get relatively little compared to all the bureaucrats just next door. And, you know, we have the European Council and we have all these different courts. Nobody really knows who chooses the judges and things like this one. It is a completely dubious project, this European Union. I mean, I'm here a year and I'm usually, I'm used to analyze other countries, you know, how that works. But Pascal, I don't know how this European thing works. It is a nebulous sort of things we have created. And it is surely not something which serves the people of Europe. And it serves a certain elite, their big plans they have. It allows them to pursue plans without having public discussions about this. I mean, you will not see really a debate. Should we really be this enlarged Europe? Do we really want to have Ukraine part of it? Do we really want to have Serbia and Greenland and all the things like this one? Is it really a Europe that is highly militarized, a Europe that has to defend against Russia and against China and maybe one day against Africa, because they will have a huge population? There is no discussion about it, but it happens nonetheless. And yeah.
But don't we then, because like what you just said, that Europe would like to be a great power in its own right would make sense to me. If they tried,
elites want it.
Yeah, if they tried to distance themselves. But if you look at how the elites ran to Washington like 3 weeks ago and were sat in front of Donald Trump like little school children in front of the headmaster, and they reported that the European media reported that as a great success of European politics. It was an utter humiliation. And for some reason, that seems not to be a problem to them.
No, I would say, I would not take it as you said. I think Europe wants to do two things, or at least these leaders want to do two things. On one side, they hope that they and not Russia is going the third leg, and India they don't discuss. It would be the third leg in a multipolar world, of superpowers. On the other hand, they try to keep the United States in as much as they can, because they know they will not win the war in Ukraine without the United States. And so I think it's not a contradiction, but I think it's really now the whole issue is about what is Europe going to be in 5 years? Are we a coherent state? Is Europe because of the perceived pressures from Russia and China coming together and building a de facto state? Or is it remaining a loose intergovernmental organization? Loose not anymore, but many of us, like me, we think we should be far more decentralized and things like this one. And I think that's the argument that it's gaining now. So I think that there's a superpower, European Union, and we see now that it is not working. I mean, look at this Sharm el-Sheikh meeting. I mean, the Middle East is next door to Europe. It's in front of our door. Israel, and especially Gaza, is just across from few kilometers on sea divided. And we don't play a role. We did not play a role. We didn't even, nobody saw even that Costas was there because he didn't say a word. So Europe, which has so much at stake in the Middle East because it's our neighbor, with whom we, with all the wars Israel is doing, has enormous impact on Europe. But we have no say on it. And then we learn that Trump and Putin want to meet on European soil, on soil of the European Union. And the European Union is completely excluded. I mean, it is for those who feel that they want it actually be the third largest, it is panic. It's panic. And I think it will not turn around. I mean, whatever happens, Trump and Putin, whatever, but I think the dice are fallen on the war, and the dice are fallen that the Americans will not interfere into the war in Ukraine. And with this one, we are so. But maybe I wanted also to talk to you about something else in this one. You know, that Europe is presently cheating Ukraine. You have not to forget, we are cheating Ukraine. We are doing as if we are the greatest friends of Ukraine, but nothing of what we promise we have been able to implement. We promised the Ukrainians that we will stick with you and we will help you to turn the war in such a way around that your negotiation position will become much stronger. The opposite has happened. We don't want to admit it, but it has happened. We said, you know, we do one more sanctions and the Russian economy will collapse, and this is also the regime in Moscow. It will not happen. You know, Pascal, there was a resolution by the European Parliament in 2004, which actually supported the idea that by winning against Russia, Russia would decolonize, as they say, to break down in their little components, and only then you have a chance that what is now Russia, these single components, would then become democratic. I mean, we have a resolution in which essentially the European Union supports a breakdown of Russia. I mean, you can imagine the Russian reaction to this. But it will not happen. You know, we have promised that we would send the Ukrainian every year 0.25% of our GDPs, which when you take them all together, it would be something like 130, 140 billion euros a year. We never did this. We don't have it. And now we have said we would send you troops. We have NATO peacekeeping troops. Will not happen. We promised them that we will have some sort of Article 5 security guarantee. It's an illusion. It will never happen. You know, clearly these security guarantees don't mean anything anyway. We told them that we give them tomahawks and towers we have resolutions in the parliament which demands from the government to send these rockets there and shoot down to Moscow. It's in written resolutions, unbelievable stuff. It will not happen. We make the promise that they will become member of the NATO and the European Union. NATO, I don't think will happen. But I also don't think that Ukraine will become member of the European Union, because suddenly countries like Poland will remember that then all the money goes to Ukraine, not anymore to them. So there will be a lot of things which will happen. And then we have the discussion about Russian assets. I mean, I hear just the talk of the Prime Minister from Belgium, where he said, yeah, I'm coming here, that these people explain me what is on what international law ground they want to do this. In other words, what he says, There is no international law to do this. And that Belgium would not allow that 200 billion Russian assets are being taken over to pay for the war in Ukraine. And, this is the only hope we have, because we don't have any other money to give them. So, so I think we are in a very difficult situation, and all the things we do are illusionary. And you can't continue a policy which is so entirely based on illusions.
But
And so I think we will see enormous political and economic collapse in Europe, and that's the only way for us to change. Unfortunately, for the time being, the train is with such high speed going into this wrong direction that there's nobody who can stop it anymore. I came back from the parliament in the last week, and I came to the conclusion: no words, no analysis, no paper would ever change them. They are in a state of panic that they are going to be the losers, and they think by having a lot stronger voice about war, and this would change it. But they cannot change the war. Europe has no way of changing the war in Ukraine, the dynamics of this war. We don't have that. And the dynamics will in the end decide what comes next, not any negotiations. And it will be a defeat of Ukraine.
But I need to ask you, so many of these things that you just outlined, these illusions that are made, and constantly these promises and that are then not kept, and these ideas and plans that are put forward, and then they're illusionary from the beginning. To me, all of this seems to really have this one overarching purpose, which is to make sure that Ukraine keeps fighting, that to make sure that you create an environment where everybody yells Ukraine, 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 except for in the places where it would actually matter, because, sending more money to Ukraine for foodstuffs, for support, for government support, for social welfare, and so on. I mean, that kind of thing would be absolutely possible. I mean, and if the European states were serious about defending Ukraine, I mean, any one of them could at any point in time unilaterally send troops over there. But of course they don't do that, because they don't want that kind of thing. But they want to talk it up, so it keeps the proxy war alive. And to me, it seems as if though that is actually in a direct interest of Washington, because it is one of the best ways to make sure that Europe will, for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, never again dream about, having a rapprochement with Russia, because we know that the grand strategic thinkers of the U.S. kept telling us that's the only thing that can checkmate the United States. It's a united Eurasian continent.
I would say that I'm not sure that there's rational thinking in Washington. At least I can't detect it. But I think the United States would not be happy about a Europe if it would become a superpower which is independent militarily and all the rest of it. So which have its nuclear weapons. In Germany, there's a lot of articles that Germany should get a nuclear arms and things like this one. And no, they would not be happy. And I think that they know that this war is lost, and they just detract from them and they leave it to Europe. What you said about money sending into Ukraine, I think you have to realize that Europe doesn't have any money anymore. I mean, we are so indebted. I mean, France is close to a financial collapse. UK is close to a financial collapse. Italy is always very close to a financial collapse. I mean, who's going to send the money? We have now all this money spent on military things at the same time, where even countries like Germany are deindustrializing. I mean, how can these countries ever, they will buy it somewhere else. And so we don't have the money to support Ukraine anymore. That's why we want to get these assets, and we will not get these assets. And this will put us in a terrible shape. Then we will announce, we have given you 1 billion, but we promised 140 billion every year. And this is not going to sustain Ukraine. Ukraine is going to be the big loser. The Ukrainians are the betrayed people in this world. And I feel great regret. I have discussions with Ukrainians also, and I always tell them, don't trust the Europeans. Think about your own national interests, how you save your country to remain sovereign and to remain somehow functional. Even if you lose territory, you have to make certain decisions. Otherwise, you might lose the whole country, because I've seen it. I've seen, of course, a lot of these conflicts outside. When the country sort of militarily collapses, very often the political system also collapses, and you will have basically a failed state. I mean, look at Syria, and look Libya, and Iraq, and this. I mean, Ukraine was already before the war the poorest country with Moldova of Europe. I mean, and now it must be absolutely disaster. And all the money we gave them, the last 50 billion Europe gave them as a loan. I mean, we expect this country to pay it back for it. I mean, despite they fighting the war for us. So I think that this whole thing will collapse, and this collapse will be not very nice, especially not nice for the Ukrainians. And I have a lot of sympathy for the Ukrainians, because they are being misused, and I think more and more realize that they are actually betrayed by first by the Americans and now by Europe, and or the European Union and the UK. And so I don't see any way in the future a nice solution of the things. And if Ukraine, a neighboring country to us Europeans, becomes a failed state, I mean, the fallout on the rest of Europe will be enormous, in form of costs, in form of insecurity, in form of refugees, and I mean all the sort of things, and which we can't afford anymore. Pascal, we are in a very, very difficult situation in Europe, and there is nothing I see from any politician presently who realizes that maybe they realize, but they don't want to admit it, there is any form of policy to prevent what is there coming at us. And I'm worried. I have 5 children. I have my 5th grandchild will be born very soon. And I think the future of Europe will be absolutely bleak. And if we continue this, what we're doing now.
I absolutely agree with you. But
I mean, and I say it with sadness. People say always, I'm not at all anti-Ukraine. I mean, my heart bleeds for them. And I say to them, stop these things. Don't listen to Starmers and people like this one. They are not in your interest. There's this old saying, the prayer to God, please protect me from my friends. For my enemies, I can look after myself. And I say to them, I mean, the only way for you out of this one is to have a deal with Russia. Russia is going to be your neighbor. It will be always your neighbor. It will be always a stronger country. And you have to make a deal with them. And I think they would have probably an interest of making a deal with you, because they also want not a collapsed state on their borders with all the right-wing militia groups and all the rest of it. So I think this is their chance. Maybe even with Trump. I mean, I'm seeing Trump a little bit less critical than Jeff, partly because I'm outside, partly because I was always in war countries, and I know that you have to deal with the people you have, and you can't choose, and you have to make the best out of it. So I think at least Trump seems to protect us, that this whole thing doesn't become a nuclear war. That's at least for the time being. And now he has ruled out again the tomahawks and things like this one. So I think that's at least there's something to it. Because Russia will win the war without them or with them, but it should not become a war in all of Europe, or even a nuclear war. And I think the risks for that are there, probably more than even during the Cold War.
No, absolutely. But, all the things that you just laid out, isn't the sick beauty of the thing for the elites that are actually running the European project, that it can all be blamed on Russia? I mean, whatever happens next, and however bad the situation will get, they will always be able to say, it was Russia. I mean, due to Russia, we're suffering like this. It's the perfect boogeyman in order to then to continue with whatever suicidal policy it is. So in a sense, the system keeps itself clean.
Maybe, but Pascal, you have changes in Europe because of this one. No, and for me, of course, I'm rather coming from the left side of politics, is of course the right-wing parties, AfD, FPÖ in Austria, Le Pen in France, this in the UK, what is his name? Farage and things like this one. And you have it also in other countries. Now, people vote. They realize that the established parties have brought them into a quagmire, and that the only alternative they see is not parties like mine parties, but it's parties which are on the right side because they promise, like Trump, more as let's say a stronger leadership. And that's also why Trump was voted for. So I think there is a change, and how we survive this change, this political change, I'm not quite sure. But all these right-wing parties are Europe critical. So I think it will be a weakening of the European Union, and it will not disappear, but it will heavily weaken. And of course, reduction in social services. I mean, Europe was always so proud of having a good medical system, pension funds. I mean, compared even to the United States and the UK. And I think that's all slowly going down the drain. And so we will have a lot of social unrest. We saw that already in Belgium. We see it in France and Italy. Germany, of course, always much less because we don't like to protest too much. And but it's a very, very dangerous situation also internally. It's not only from the outside. The real danger is from inside, that the instability, the loss of trust in governments, the loss of trust in political parties, the loss of trust in the judicial system. These things are something you don't recreate very easily overnight. You have lost it over time. And that will make governing very, very difficult in the future. And it will allow many radical elements to come up with radical solutions, which might not be good for us. So I think the internal issue is for us probably just as important as the foreign policy and security policy, in these two wars.
If you could, as a last question, if you could rethink Europe today, a tabula rasa, I know we will not have it, but would you look toward examples like ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, for a different setup of a Europe made of European nations, but not of a European Union?
I've started a discussion with some of my friends whether we couldn't bring in spring next year a sort of a manifest in which we put out of sort of a 10-point thing of what we think Europe should be. So I can't answer this. Let me not answer it now, but I tell you, we are working on it. We have to think what type of Europe we want to have, how centralized we have. I don't see, like Jeff said, that Europe should become a sort of a state. I don't think that fits in Europe. I think for our great advantages is the diversity. We don't all have to have the same number plates as we have now. But what for? I quite like if a Greek does things differently to Germany. I mean, it's very nice. It doesn't have to be the same, and still we can work together. So we want to have a different Europe, but which is far more decentralized, which and more people oriented than and of course a Europe that is not so militarized. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about our defense, but not what we do now. But we will have something, Pascal, and I will present it to you. As we plan something for March, April. It depends also on the political situation. I think these things, of course, are best introduced when the problem sort of gets to its peak, and people think, what could be done otherwise. And I think also I could probably get quite a lot of parliamentarians behind it. No.
That will be good. That will be good because it's the one.
But it's a big issue, Pascal. You're right. This is a big issue. What Europe we want, because this Europe we have now, or the direction we take now, that will not. That will collapse. So, but we have to be responsible to our people. That means we can't only have something collapse. We have also to think of how we bring back order and sort of system people can identify with and things like this one. And there is no thinking presently I know of in Europe.
But we can do this here. We can do this online. And Ulrike Gero is thinking about it, and the neutral Europe for for everybody, and a transcontinental initiative and so on. There are spaces. We just need to think it first. The EU and the European community have to be thought about first as well. Just got to do it.
Pascal, one of the things I issued now is a booklet on the UN Charter. Pascal, I've been 34 years, of which 30 years for the UN, and I've worked also 30 years in countries with war. And there the UN Charter is very important. You cannot work in wars if you don't have a charter and, the legal system, which is based on the charter, like human rights, like the the Geneva Accords and things like this one, the Refugee Convention, the protection of the children. All these things which are based on the UN Charter are so extremely important. And what is so worrying today is that we have an increase in military technology, especially in the speed, and the destruction power is so enormous. And we will have a session with Postal very soon in the parliament, and hopefully we invite also his Russian counterpart. That we can basically destroy today the world in 1 hour with all we have, and at the same time we have a total collapse of the international legal system. In Europe, if I put out my brochure in Germany, hardly anybody reacts. If I show it to the Russians, to the Chinese, to the Indians, to the Indonesians, to the Africans, they all love it. We don't. And we must not forget, NATO countries is 10% of people in the world. There is a 90% outside. And maybe associations like BRICS countries, which are now larger economically, have more technology on their side than the G7 or especially European Union. They have not created a military alliance similar to NATO, and they are not likely to do this. And there is some hope. Do we really need NATO? Do we really need an organization that's already now consumes 55% of all military expenditures in the world is on these NATO countries, which represent 10% of the world population? Now with the increases to 5% of GDP, it will not happen, but it will increase. We might end up with NATO with 70% of all military expenditures done on a military alliance of 10% of the world population. What about the under 92%? And that's why I think the UN Charter is so important. There is nothing that could replace the UN Charter today. It is a document which calls on no more wars and the dignity, the human dignity. And this is something we need today more than even in 45. Because then it was written on the background of 80 million people killed during the 2 world wars. Today, if we have a 3rd world war, we might all be killed. So I think we better think of how we prevent wars in future. That wars doesn't bring anything. It doesn't help anybody, and we have to be intelligent enough to do this. And that's why also with some of the commentaries, from people who think like us, who think that the world is always in a competition of great powers, I don't think that's the case. I think India and in China have a different approach than the United States and Great Britain, as they were sort of Pax Britannica and Pax Americana. They have a different approach, and that's our hope, that they will basically help us to have still superpowers, but they're not necessarily at war with each other. And the UN Charter, we all agreed is not that we don't use military force. We agreed that we would always negotiate our differences, that we would seek peaceful solutions in order to prevent wars. Now we say, we shouldn't have any wars, but we refuse to negotiate. So we breached the UN Charter. The UN Charter is simple, but it's very, very powerful. And I hope that in Europe, and especially in Germany, people would listen a little bit more what the UN Charter is, and maybe one day we can make a session on this one, why the UN Charter and things like this one. And, especially since I'm somebody, a rare person who writes these things, who's actually been in countries with wars and what that means in reality. And I'm not an international legal expert, but I think I'm quite an expert on the Charter if it comes to its application in war circumstances. So it is important. And Pascal, it is a sign of hope. And in Europe, you have to remember also the Charter of Paris for a new Europe, which is based on the UN Charter. When you see the beginning, it is a reference to the Charter, that what we want to in Charter, that's we do now here in Europe. I mean, these are models which we have all agreed on. So we don't have really to think about something new. We have just to do what once we have agreed. The Charter is signed by 193 countries in the world. That means basically all the countries. It's not only signed, it's ratified. And if you ratify something, it's a Charter, is law in all the 193 countries. That's what ratification means. And we don't behave like this.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, the Charter was a present of the United States in 1945. We would never had it without the United States, with Theodore Roosevelt and things like this one. And it's us now, the West, who betrays the UN Charter. And it's not China. It's not these countries in the South. It's not the BRICS countries. We are betraying the Charter. And that is a great tragedy of our times.
But that is also the light of hope, that the Charter is the one thing that everybody actually stands behind, even if they break it, right? Even if they break the spirit or the articles of it, but nobody questions actually the Charter.
Now, I think the European Union does, because we have now a new term to explain what we're doing. We're using this Latin thing of si vis pacem para bellum, which means if you want to have peace, you have to prepare for war, not for defense. You have to prepare for war. And then you listen to the Minister of War, as he's called now in the United States, when he spoke to his general, he said, you only deserve peace if you can go for war and you can win wars. The whole idea that human beings are negative, that you have to protect each other against the others, is a completely different world than the world described in the UN Charter. The UN Charter assumes that we are rational people, that we have empathy for each other, and that's why we can negotiate and solve our problems through negotiations. But this one suggests the only way to solve things is to have the better weapon system. So, and things like this one. So we will all become one day the type of North Korea that you can't attack us because we have nuclear bombs and we have the delivery systems of it. And that would make us all sit on a powder cake. It cannot be the future. But I tell you, in the United States and in Europe, it is this terrible, terrible Roman state that now governs the things and not the UN Charter.
But there is this one problem with the UN Charter, and this is this Article 51, that guarantees not only the right to defend yourself, but also to collective self-defense. If I could change one thing, I would strike that out.
No, of course you have to allow this. Defense.
But collective self-defense.
The issue is only, Pascal, the issue is the UN Charter doesn't allow you to conduct 4 years of war with it. It doesn't say it. It says as quickly as possible, you have to go to the Security Council to find a peaceful solution. And that's exactly what Russia and Ukraine did in March of 22, 1 month into the war, that they have found a peaceful solutions and we boycotted it. No, we have to have this, child. Only we have to read it properly. It doesn't justify an ongoing war is what we're doing now. No, it doesn't. No, the Charter is much. And then we shouldn't forget, it is Article 51. And you have to read the Article 51 in combination with the other 50 articles before it. It's, and you will get a completely different impression what it means. It doesn't allow us to continue the war. It doesn't allow us what we're doing now. That's not self-defense. That's called war. The UN Charter, for instance, doesn't make a difference anymore between a just and unjust war, which we had there before the Second World War.
Yes.
It doesn't. It says war in general we shouldn't have. And everybody, everybody feels that they do just wars. Everybody, whether attacked or not attacked, is responsible for negotiating their differences in order to prevent war or to stop the war as quickly as possible. That's what the UN Charter says. And I think it's a wonderful document. So let's maybe do one session about the UN Charter.
Let's do that. It's a topic for a future webinar. Michael von der Schulenburg, thank you very much for your wonderful insights, and good luck with what you're doing in the parliament. You're one of the few voices of reason over there, so please continue.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, Pascal. Huh? Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.